In the last stream, we were working on setting up our very first bits of applied energistics to autocrafting. We started over here with one molecular assembler connected to one ME pattern provider, allowing us to autocraft up to 9 different recipes using these different crafting patterns. And we then went ahead and set up this multi-block controller. At the end of the last episode, we did only have 5 controllers down, but between streams, I have gone ahead and built out the entire 5x5 cube of multi-block controller. It is a little unnecessary. It is using 350 redstone flux per tick passively, and 264 of that is just because we have so many controllers, but I think it does look better, and it does mean going forward, we're going to have a ton of access to a ton of different channels, especially if we look at upgrading our regular ME Fluix cable to dense ME Fluix cable. We did look at these a little bit in the last episode. These are not too difficult to make. They're made initially by crafting one Fluix cable with one wool. That gets you a covered ME Fluix cable. From there, if you craft 4 of those together, you get a dense ME covered cable, which I believe is the cheapest dense cable that you can make. The reason we didn't make a lot of these in the last episode is that we didn't have a lot of wool. However, the other thing that we did set up in the last stream was our new mob farm right here. And so now, if we were to go ahead and grab one of our ME storage buses out of the system, we can go ahead and connect that up to our controller, and that's going to give us access, crucially, to all of the string that is inside of the chest here, which we can then craft into wool, which we can then use to craft dense cable. Also, we can use that wool to begin crafting elevators as well. These are not strictly necessary, but along with the ender pearls that we now have, these are a nice quality of life improvement that are going to make it much less likely that we fall into the abyss and die when trying to get to the lower level of our platform. If we were to do something like this and like this, we can now walk on the elevator, jump, and it takes us to the elevator above it. You can also walk on the elevator above, press shift, and it will take you to the elevator below. And so we can probably now look at getting rid of some of these ladders as well that we have kind of dotted around the base. These not really that useful. They haven't been that useful for a little while now, to be honest, but it just means that we don't have to do this anymore where we fly off and then fly down, which for the most part works, but as we saw in the last episode, it does occasionally result in me kind of falling off into the abyss, which is not ideal. Now, I do want to move quite a bit of what we've put down here because we kind of just slapdashed through a bunch of stuff down and it doesn't really look particularly good. It's not particularly organized. Neither is the cable up here. So there's definitely work to be done. To do some of that work, we're going to need a couple of things. One of the things that we have not looked at yet is anchors. These are particularly useful and not too difficult to make. These are just made with any ingot. You can use copper, iron, gold, anything really will work there with an AE2 knife. The AE2 knife you can either make with Certus quartz or nether quartz. Surprisingly, we actually have more Certus quartz now than nether quartz. We can then take the ingot that we have the most of, for us that's copper, and we can craft up a bunch of these cable anchors. These have a couple of different uses. One of the main uses is to prevent cables from connecting. So if you have 2 different lines of cable, like this and then like this, if you don't want these to connect, you can go ahead and put the cable anchors down like this, here and here, and that will just prevent those cables from touching each other. Another use for these cables here is that you can use them to craft facades. These facades can then be used to cover pre-existing cable. So if we did something like this, that would allow us to hide cable inside the ground, which is pretty useful stuff. So if we go ahead and kind of pick these up, what we can do, and by the looks of it, you do lose that facade, by the way, when you pick it up, which I was not aware of, but I believe what we should be able to do, if we grab some more of the smooth stone bricks, we should be able to craft up a facade with those bricks, like so. And I'm fairly certain that if I put a cable here, a facade here, and then a cable here, that does connect through the facade to the lower level cable, which then, I've got to be very careful here because we are getting quite low. Let me quickly F3. I'm pretty sure we get flight down to Y level 55. I'm going to increase that just ever so slightly so that I don't fall to my death. Let me lower that to like 50. Again, that is going to increase the power consumption even further, but I do want to look at increasing our power production at some point in today's stream, so hopefully that's not going to be too big of an issue. We can then run that across, and if we go ahead and move this guy, we can then kind of just connect this up to the bottom of here. Not only does that look better, it means we don't have a cable just running kind of across the top surface of the platform, but it also now has its own kind of dedicated channel, and we don't really have to worry about that taking up a separate channel on one of our pre-existing cables. Nice. So let's do this. And we're also going to kind of use the same system to move a lot of what we have over here, because I do want to move my molecular assembler and my pattern provider over to this platform. And I think we'll probably also move our thermal expansion machines as well. As I mentioned before, this is a very temporary location for them. And so I'm going to pick these up, and I kind of want to put those down over on this bottom platform over here, which is kind of going to end up being, I think, a bit of an automation platform with a bunch of machines and a bunch of the AE2 pattern providers, because, of course, much like with the molecular assembler and much like with the pressure chambers in the last episode, what we can do here is we can go ahead and place our machines down like this, and then we can place ME pattern providers on top of those machines. We can then set these to input and output, which is this kind of blue and orange mix. From the top, if we set auto input and auto eject to on, that's then going to be able to receive items from the top and then pump them right back up into the pattern provider, which is going to allow us to automate certain crafts using these thermal expansion machines. And going forward, there are quite a few more thermal expansion machines that we're probably going to line up along this wall here. As for the molecular assembler, I do want to move this. Again, you can use the hammer to pick these up more easily, like so. And we're probably going to end up putting these down over here. And for the time being, I think what I'm probably going to do is put down one molecular assembler and surround it with ME pattern providers. What that's going to do is that's going to give us the maximum number of potential crafting recipes that we can teach to the one molecular assembler. That's not the fastest way to do it. It is faster to have one pattern provider surrounded by molecular assemblers. At that point, you can craft multiple things simultaneously if and only if you use crafting co-processing units, that's these guys right here, in the construction of your multi-block CPU. That's getting a bit beyond the complexity level that we're working at currently, and so for now, I'm just going to go ahead and throw down this molecular assembler, and then I'm going to connect to that molecular assembler 6 ME pattern providers, so the one we currently have, and then 5 more around it. That is going to start using up channels quite quickly, but again, we could go ahead and replace this cable with a dense cable, which would allow us to put down quite a few of these little clusters here, because again, we can put multiple of them down if we want even more crafting capacity, but I think for now, this is probably fine. I do believe if we wanted to, we could also look at getting a pattern terminal, which I think is this pattern access terminal here. I believe we can put this down up next to our pre-existing terminals, and that should show us all of the places that we have already that we can put patterns into, if that makes sense. Do we have what it takes to make this? We do not. We're missing one pattern provider, which is what we've just been making, and to make more of those, we need crafting tables. I'll make a bunch of them, and of course, as per usual, we need formation and annihilation cores. Boom, and boom. That should be everything for the access terminal. It is, and if we put that down right about here, we should be able to see all of our pattern providers that we've put down in the world. So here we have all of the crafting slots for all of the patterns that are around that molecular assembler. Down here, we've got Oak Chest. I don't know if we can rename that. I believe that's this one right here. I don't think there's a way to give it a name. That would be useful if we could change the name of this to like PCB production or something, so we know what it is, but we can also get a good idea of what it is by looking at what it makes, of course. And then, of course, we've got all of our pressure chamber interfaces here, making the empty PCBs, the transistors, the capacitors, and the compressed mechanisms. And the nifty thing here is that if we want to now add more just kind of generic crafting recipes to our molecular assembler, we don't have to go back and forth between the pattern encoding terminal and the pattern provider. We can just go in here. For example, let's say we wanted to teach it how to make more of those pattern providers. We could go ahead and encode this. Let's also go ahead real quick and see if we can't make more of these blank patterns here, because we are running a little low inside of our encoding terminal. We could then teach it how to make crafting tables. We could also teach it how to make the formation cores, and we could teach it how to make the annihilation cores as well. And if we throw all of those up into really any of these pattern providers, they all work around the same molecular assembler, we should now be able to request that our system make these pattern providers for us. And assuming we have all of the items required, and assuming we have a big enough crafting CPU, which we totally do, we can just hit start, and it's going to make one for us, which is so much easier than us having to make it manually, which is great. And then we can go ahead and throw this down, let's say right about here, because you don't actually need access to that center molecular assembler. However, I do think it's going to make sense, given that we have so many pattern providers around, for us to add the max 5 acceleration cards to that molecular assembler so that we can maximize the speed at which our autocrafts are completed. So boom, and then I'm going to quickly make 5 more so that we can actually refill our advanced inscriber. And there we go, those are now all filled up again. And so now, if we are going to move our machines over here, we do need to get power to these machines. And of course, one thing we could do is we could just go ahead and run our logic cable down and then put down an energy exporter and then put a variable card in it and export energy from our current energy system. However, I do think it's probably going to be sensible for us to look. It looks like power is completely dead here, which is not ideal. I did manage to get those 2 pattern providers, which I will put here and here for future autocrafting, but I think it's probably worth looking at pivoting over into Flux networks. This is a pretty easy way of moving power wirelessly around the base without having to run cables to every single machine. And so back up here, if we want to get into Flux networks, we need at the bare minimum a Flux plug and a Flux point. To make these, they're both fairly similar recipes. They both require these Flux cores, which are made using Flux Dust, Obsidian, and Eyes of Ender. This is kind of the key as to why we didn't do it before. We did need Ender Pearls and Blaze Powder, both of which we now have in abundance, and of course, both of which we can now access from our system because of the fact that we have that storage bus connected to our mob farm chest. And so really, the only thing that we don't have here is Flux Dust. The Flux Dust is made by putting redstone on top of bedrock and then underneath obsidian. So how much obsidian do we have? We've got 59. We can buy more, I think. Redstone, we've got a ton. We are very much so, by the looks of it, on the brink when it comes to power here, because whenever we try and do anything with our system, the whole thing shuts down, which is not ideal. And so here, all we need to do now, really, to get a bunch of Flux Dust, and I will take more than 1 stack of redstone here, is we need to go find a piece of bedrock that we can use to make this happen. And I think, given that we're in a Skyblock world here, the really only solution that we have is probably to head on through to the Nether and then dig all the way down to bedrock and do it there. Alright, so after a little bit of digging using the mining tunnel mode here on the FTB Ultimine, we found some bedrock, and so here all we should have to do is drop down our redstone, like so, make sure it's on the bedrock, put the obsidian 1 block above, like this, then left click on the obsidian, it's going to slam down, make quite a loud bang, but we get 2 Flux Dust. And we can also re-pick up the obsidian if we want, and going forward, if we want even more, we can just come back and repeat that process again. And then back over here, we should now be able to craft all of this Flux Dust up into some of these Flux cores. Let me quickly go ahead and craft up a couple of these Eyes of Ender. Let's craft up a couple of these Flux cores, and once we've got at least 8, we should then be able to make our Flux point very easily with 1 block of redstone. And then as for the Flux plug here, this is made with a Flux block, which requires even more of these Flux cores. So let's make sure we have at least 12 ready to go. And then we can make our Flux block and we can make our Flux plug. So the Flux plug is kind of the only thing that we need 1 of here. This is going to go down on our power source. For us, that is this battery right here. And in here, let me stand on solid ground so that if my flight gives out, I don't fall into the abyss. In here, we're going to click Create New Network in the top right. We're going to call this Isaac Power. I believe you do have to get a password. It doesn't really matter what the password is, though, because it's not going to ask you for this again if you're the person who created the network. Then let's go for this light blue and hit Create. We can then select which power network we want to use. Again, if we tried to use somebody else's here, it would ask us for a password. But if we try and select our own, it won't ask us. It will just connect. We can then go ahead and bypass limit just to be safe. And now we can then go ahead and put a Flux point down anywhere that we want that power to be sent. So if we were to go over to our thermal expansion machines here, what we could do is we could go ahead and, let's say, put this down right here. You'll see it connects to the bottom there. If we now click on this kind of white box at the top, we can then click Isaac Power, and now it's going to start sending power into the pulverizer. Hard to see because the pulverizer already had power, but this will pull power from that battery and send it around into here. Again, you can bypass limit if you want. You can also go ahead and place this down like this and then connect energy cable to it. I think at this point in time, we probably could make some universal cable from Mechanism. This is just steel and redstone. And I don't know if we could upgrade it because the infused alloy does require the metallurgic infuser, which we can't quite make yet because we don't have the casing. But the universal cable here can move 3,200 redstone flux per tick, which is more than enough for what we're currently working with. And with this, you can do something like this to allow these machines to get power from that one flux point, which just makes it so much easier to get different amounts of power to different parts of the base. Now, the only problem with our current setup, and it's quite a big problem, is that we actually don't have any power. As you may have just noticed in here, the power is gone. There's nothing inside of this energy battery, likely due to the fact that we have such a massive multi-block ME controller. So to fix that, we do actually have quite a few options in terms of what kind of power we want to work with, but I think that we are probably going to look to the power mod. And one thing I've not made in quite some time are these magmators. These are lava-using generators that are going to produce power for us, and there's quite a few different tiers, starting at the starter tier, then moving up to basic, hardened, blazing, niotic, spirited, and nitro. And given the fact that we can buy emerald ore, I think we could probably fairly easily get up to the spirited tier, if not definitely the niotic tier, and these guys produce a fair amount of power. We can make 8,000 redstone flux per tick with the spirited magmator, or 2,000 RF per tick with the niotic magmator, meaning that even one niotic magmator is going to produce almost double, but just in general more power than our current alternator setup. And so to get started with the power mod, we do need some dielectric paste here. And this is one of those situations where I think it is going to be worth just teaching our system how to make the dielectric paste with coal, clay, and blaze powder. Do we have any clay in the system? We do, and it's coming in automatically, so we shouldn't really have to worry too much about that. We are going to want to teach it how to make these dielectric rods, which are done in here and are made with iron bars. Again, we should probably also go ahead and teach the iron bars. Boom. We can also teach the horizontal dielectric rods as well. Both of those are needed to make these dielectric casings, which are kind of like the machine frames of power. We're going to need a fair few of those. Again, doesn't really matter where we put these. They're all connected to the same molecular assembler. So long as they're in there somewhere, it should work just fine. And the first thing that we need is an energizing orb. This guy right here. One nifty feature, by the way, of Applied Energistics is you'll see when we hover over this, we don't have the casing or the rods, and that's why it's showing up in blue. If you hold down control and then click fill recipe, it will automatically take you to the page where you can request those crafts be done for you. Now, right now, we actually don't have any coal. Thankfully, we can rectify that, of course, with a quick squeeze over here. Not that we have that much power. That is going to run out quite quickly, but thankfully, that should be enough. If we try that again, as soon as the system comes back online, let me try for the energizing orb, hold down control, hit fill. We can then hit start. That's going to start the recipe. Of course, we only have one crafting CPU at the moment, and so we can only do one craft at a time. I don't know if I wait here, if it's going to let me do that. It will. If you just wait long enough, as soon as the first craft is finished, it will let you do the second craft, at which point we can then just go ahead and click fill recipe, and it will have all of the ingredients ready to go. Nice. From there, we need an energizing rod. I do believe that you have to craft these up. You do, so we have to start with the starter energizing rod no matter what. This is made with dielectric case, quartz, dielectric rods, and then some of these tiny capacitors. These are made from regular capacitors, these guys right here. We'll encode this recipe. We'll also encode the recipe for the tiny capacitors as well, because I think those are going to be needed elsewhere. Let me put both of those in here. Now, in order to make the regular capacitors here, we do need a redstone ingot, something we've not yet made, but this shouldn't be too difficult. This can be made with a block of redstone and a steel, and again, we can probably now look to utilize our induction smelter downstairs that we've just connected up to a pattern provider to maybe automate this production. If we go ahead and encode that, we can place this into this pattern provider, and then from there, we just need to make sure that this pattern provider is connected up to the system. So if we were to do something like this, we could then potentially run this down across. And if we have enough cable, which I think we just might, we can then hopefully bring that online and allow us to just craft those redstone ingots. Let's give it a try. If I say next and, oh, it doesn't know how to make blocks of redstone, that does make sense. Let me quickly go ahead and teach it how to make those blocks of redstone. Back to crafting, give it a quick one of these and encode. Fantastic. That can go again into any one of these. But now, if we request a redstone ingot and hit start, we should see those items get sent around into here. They totally do. And once it's done, it should eject the items back out to the top, and it should be in the system. It is perfect. And so, in theory, now we should have basically everything it takes to make this first energizing orb. Again, control and fill, start, and we should probably just look at getting a couple more of, back tank low on pressure. I didn't realize my jetpack was still on. We turned it on when we went through to the nether. But we should probably look at getting a few more of these crafting storage CPU parts so that we can do multiple crafts at once, especially given that currently our crafts are all quite small. And so if we just got a couple of the 1K crafting storage parts, we could throw a couple of these down and give us quite a lot more crafting capability without having to wait between each craft. Okay, so I crafted up 3 1K storage components. However, we are running into the potential issue of not having enough channels again. So real quick, let me encode the dense cable. Let me also encode the covered cable. Let's also encode just regular Fluix cable, along with, of course, the quartz fiber there. Again, we are now out of blank patterns. That is fine. We definitely have what it takes to make a bunch more of these, really as many as we want, I think. Let's re-encode that. We could also encode the recipe, the pulverizer recipe here, for turning Certus quartz into Certus quartz dust. You'll see there when I did that, it did try and pull in the catalyst. If you don't want the catalyst, you can just shift left click and it will delete what's in that second slot, which is fine. Also here, we're not guaranteed 3, right? No, we're not guaranteed 3. So I'm going to change that to 2. It does mean sometimes we'll get more than what it thinks, but I think it's better to underestimate than overestimate, because if you overestimate and it doesn't get the item bank, it's going to cause issues with crafts, whereas if you underestimate, it's probably just going to work every time. In fact, we could, if we really wanted to, just set it to 1, not 2, because there's only a 50% chance to get 2, but a 50% chance to get 2 means that more often than not, we're going to, on the whole, it will work, but you know what, I'm going to change it. We'll make it just to 1, like that. You can shift right click an old pattern, by the way, if you want to reuse it after you've already used it once, like so. Clear the recipe on there. And then finally, what do I need? I need to teach it how to make the wool for the covered cable. So we need to teach it how to make just white wool encode. And I think that should be basically everything, to where now we should be able to request that some dense cable be made for us. So if I wanted some of this, let's say I wanted 20, might be a lot. It's so much string to make it, but it is possible. It's going to take a second here because, again, the system does not like the fact that we have no power. Once those are done, we can then take them downstairs, and assuming that 21 is enough, we should be able to kind of go ahead and replace some of this cable here. So I would like potentially at least 1 smart dense cable, which is this thing right here. Boom. And that way we can kind of replace the smart cable we already had with a dense smart cable, which you'll see now does have 32 channels available to it. And so now if we go ahead and kind of quickly replace some of these, we should have many more channels to play with. You'll see this cable is much thicker than the previous one. And the good news here as well is that you can use normal Fluix cable for kind of the last mile, as it were. So if we wanted to have like a center cable like this running off down the middle, we can then use normal Fluix cable to then connect up to that dense cable like this. This totally works. And again, it could be quite useful here to do something like this, where we have a smart cable so that we can see how many channels are coming off here. So back here, we'll see that all those channels are connected, 6 out of 32, and we're using 6 of those here. Obviously, we can only do 8 from this point where the normal Fluix cable is, but we still have 26 more that we can use on the cable as a whole, which means we can connect these back up, and that's all gonna just work, right? So like, how many channels are we using now? We are using 8 channels, but now we can still add more stuff to this network. For example, let's go ahead and move the crafting storage here. And I think I'm probably just gonna go ahead and embed these in the ground for the time being. And that's kind of gonna auto connect them to our setup. So if I were to put them like here, 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 and here. Again, you can connect these, by the way. I didn't really mention that, but you can put multiple of them down. This is a 1K crafting storage. If I did this now connects as a multi-block structure and is now effectively a 2K crafting storage. You can even do this as well, and that's now effectively a 6K crafting storage. But for us, that's not what we want. We want to have 4 separate, distinct CPUs, because if you want to do multiple crafts at once, you need a CPU for each individual craft. And by each individual craft, I should clarify there, if you're trying to craft something and it needs to craft dependencies, those don't count as new crafts. That's all like kind of one craft. So if I wanted to make a PCB here, for example, middle mouse click, if you already have the item in the system, I want 100 of these. It's going to have to do other crafts to make this happen, but this all counts as one craft. Whereas having these down allows me to go ahead and request one thing and then go ahead and request another and another and another. We can have 4 kind of different crafts going simultaneously because we have 4 CPUs, so long as the CPU is all big enough for the crafts we want to do, which is kind of the issue we saw earlier when we were trying to request the energizing orb. Let's go ahead and now try and request the stuff for the energizing rod. Here, we click start. This time we were only missing one item, so it's fine. But now if we wanted to upgrade this to the basic rod, you'll see here we're missing two things. One of those things is a quartz block, which again, we can go ahead and teach to our system. Let's go in here, get rid of this, quickly throw our quartz in like so, in code. And this is going to be a good way to show this off here, because now if we go ahead and control click this, we have two distinct crafts. We wouldn't have been able to do that before because we didn't have two crafting CPUs available, but now we have two that were able to make that work. Nice. And I think all of these should be online. They're not all online, and that's because we didn't put down enough cable. We can do this and this. That's going to bring the third one online. And then if we make two more dense cable, we can actually go ahead and connect that third one up as well. And over here, we should see that we're doing just fine. 11 out of 32 channels. But over here, we've still got the 6 out of 8 because that flux cable is coming off of the dense cable, which is good. Nice. And that's kind of going to be the plan going forward for the rest of the base. We're going to connect up a bunch of new stuff. Of course, if we wanted to, we could do something like this, and that would prevent dense cable next to this from connecting to this. We could even do it up here as well, which would allow us to run a separate dense cable right next to the pre-existing one. You can also color the dense cables as well. That's where all of these different colors come in, because any cable of one color won't connect to a cable of another color. So again, if you want cables really close together, you can also differentiate via color as well. And in here, you'll see we now have 4 separate CPUs, all capable of doing distinct tasks. Either way, back up here, we should now be able to make that new energizing rod, and we can start using this to use our energizing orb. We can't quite make the next tier of energizing rod here because this one requires hardened capacitors, which require energized steel, which is made inside of the energizing orb. So the way this works is we have to place down our energizing rod onto a power cable, like so. Then we have to place the energizing orb nearby. I'm not quite sure how close, but the range is quite big. You can probably put it 3, 4, 5 blocks away, but it needs to be fairly close to the energizing rod. You'll see right now there's no power in the energizing rod. That is because we still have no power over here. This battery is completely out of power, which is, again, really not ideal, but there's not really a whole lot we can do about that outside of potentially, temporarily, cutting down our controller a little bit because it is maybe slightly unnecessarily big. If we did something like this, and then maybe like this, and then also potentially like this, that should cut off a large portion of the controller here, which I think is going to slowly lose power and then disconnect, and that should be fine. Nothing is connected to that part of the controller at the moment, and so this should keep going, but this should just come offline, and therefore this should be using way less power, so that hopefully this starts to get some power at some point. Okay, so it looks like for whatever reason, the flux plug there did not want to pull out of the energy battery. Like when I put it on the bottom, it just didn't work. I've moved it over to here, and power is now being moved over to this guy. Even when the battery filled up, it wasn't sending power over, but now this is completely full. And so now we can actually use this energizing orb to make energized steel. As we saw a second ago, the recipe for this is just gold and iron. And annoyingly, the way this works is you have to put exactly 1 gold and exactly 1 iron in, at which point the energizing rod will begin shooting power into the energizing orb, and it will transform it into energized steel once 10,000 redstone flux has been sent through. I say annoyingly because if you try and put in a bunch of gold and a bunch of iron, it just doesn't work. For one, you can't put that many items in, but even if I try to put in 2 gold and 2 iron, nothing is going to happen. It's not going to make me 4 energized steel. It's going to do nothing until I take it out and put the exact right amount of items in. It's just something to bear in mind, which makes it a little trickier to automate, but not impossible. And so once we have some energized steel, we can go ahead and make the hardened capacitor. That requires first that we get a large capacitor. The large capacitor is crafted with 2 basic capacitors. Again, that's something that we should probably go ahead and just teach our system how to make here real quick. Let's do that, and let's do this. And so now we should be able to make these a reality. Again, control, click to fill, start, and boom, fantastic. That gets us 2 hardened capacitors, which then is enough to make the next tier of hardened energizing rod. Start and start. Down here, we're going to pick up the pre-existing energizing rod, and we're just going to go ahead and upgrade this to the next tier. So if everything is correct, we can make it. Nice. And boom. The benefit of the higher tier rods is that they can move power faster. So the basic rod we had before had a maximum input and output rate of 400 redstone flux per tick. The new one can do 1,000 redstone flux per tick, so it's over twice as fast, which just means it's even quicker at doing this kind of craft. It's just going to transform the items faster. If we wanted to go even further here, if we wanted to make the blazing rod, this one requires the blazing capacitor, which requires these blazing crystals, and those are made either with 1 blaze rod or with 4 blaze powder. You'll see this takes a bit longer because it requires 90,000 redstone flux in total, but that totally works. 1, 2, 3, 4. That also should work, usually works. Never mind, it's only 3 in this pack, and that also looks like it works. And so really here, we just need to get 4 of these blazing crystals, which we should be able to do with 1 more blaze rod, at which point we should have everything that we need to make this happen. Let me go ahead and request more stuff whilst we wait, because I know for a fact we're going to need more of those capacitors, which is going to require the induction smelter again, but that should be everything. It is indeed for the blazing capacitor. Again, we can go ahead and pick this guy up and upgrade it to the next tier, just as soon as we request yet more quartz blocks and yet more dielectric casing. Nice. Boom. And now this can do 4,000 Fe per tick, which you might be thinking is way more than we're currently producing, so what's the point? But you'll see it does have an internal buffer that is filling up quite quickly, and it just, again, makes it faster at actually doing the craft using the internal buffer of power that it already has. Speaking of which, the tier after this is Niotic. This is where we get to those diamonds that we saw before. This one is more deceptively expensive because the blazing capacitors, you make 2 of these at a time with 4 blazing crystals. Once you get to the Niotic tier, you need 4 Niotic crystals for 1 Niotic capacitor, and then you still need 2 capacitors to make the Niotic rod. And so it's around now that we could start looking at actually making the magmator here. For this, again, I don't know if we have to upgrade previous tiers, we totally do, and so it's probably well worth teaching our system here how to make some of this happen. So let's encode the first tier of magmator and the basic magmator. Let's also include the hardened magmator. We'll do the blazing magmator. This one does 800 redstone flux per tick. And then in an ideal world, we would get the Niotic, so I'll encode it. And the spirited would be ideal as well, but that's quite expensive power-wise. But we can go ahead and throw all of these into our auto-crafting system, which is very quickly filling up with patterns. But now, can we make the blazing magmator? We almost can. We, of course, just need some energized steel to make the hardened capacitors, and then some blazing crystals to make the blazing capacitors. And then on top of that, we also need to teach it how to make, I guess, the different tiers of capacitors, like hardened, like blazing, like Niotic, and like spirited. Nitro is also available, but Nitro requires nether stars and a ton of power, neither of which we have at the moment. And so for now, let's just make sure that all of these are placed in here, and let's quickly grab some more hardened steel and some more blazing crystals, and we should be able to fairly easily make this magmator happen. And ideally, at some point in the not-so-distant future, we'd also like to upgrade the diamonds as well here. You'll see this is 300,000 redstone flux. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. If we wanted to make the Niotic magmator, how many of these would we need? We need 5 plus 8 more, so 13 in total. I think we could probably make 13 of these Niotic crystals as well. And so I think that the Niotic magmator is probably doable. The spirited, though, at that point, we're definitely going to need more power because each one of these is 1,000,000 redstone flux. And again, we need the same 13 to make that spirited magmator. And so we'd need 13 million redstone flux to make that happen, which seems unlikely. And so I'll start by making the blazing crystals and the hardened steel, and then we'll put that down, I think, to give us a power boost, and then we'll try and use that power boost to hopefully make the Niotic crystals. All right, so we have everything here to make the blazing magmator, I believe, and I guess we can, get that going there. But we should now be able to go ahead and place this down over by, well, really anywhere, I guess, but really it just needs to be somewhere near where lava is. And I guess, honestly, we could probably put it here and set the left-hand side there to output. That should start to send lava to the magmator, and power is going to be produced. Cool. Only 800 Fe per tick, but which is not crazy, but it's not terrible. And we could also, of course, at this point, look at putting a flux plug on the magmator as well to add power to our flux network. Again, we're going to run into a reoccurring theme here, but I think it's probably well worth teaching our system just how to make a lot of this stuff ahead of time so that we don't have to keep making it manually. It really does pay dividends in the future when we can just request that a flux plug or a flux point is made. We don't have to think about doing it ourselves. We can just do this, and while we're here, let's also do the flux point as well, like this. Let's put all of those up into here. We're going to have to put down more pattern providers and more molecular assemblers soon, though, because we are very quickly running out of the slots that we already have. Do we have, though, what it takes to make another flux plug? We do. Nice. That's very quick. We can then place this down onto our magmator, let's say like that. make sure it's connected to our network. The disable limit is not required. That's really only necessary if you go past the transfer limit of 800,000. But now that should be able to send power down into this setup, which should allow us to use this a fair bit faster, because we should hopefully see this now filling up quickly. But I think now with that extra boost to power, we should be able to ever so slightly more quickly make these 13 nitro crystals. And once we have those, we'll look at quickly upgrading our magmeter from blazing to Niotic. And then from there, we could also look, if we wanted to, at upgrading to spirited as well. And once we have 13 Niotic crystals, we can dump those in the system. And if we had more blazing crystals, we could just make another one, but I feel like we might as well just go ahead and drop this in the system. Magmeter, can we upgrade that to Niotic? We can. Start. And again, I don't think that's going to take too long at all to complete, thanks to those acceleration cards that we put in earlier. And now we've almost tripled our power production up to 2,000 redstone flux per tick from that lava. Hopefully our lava is holding steady. I think it is. And then now back down here, let's continue making more of these Niotic crystals. And we're hopefully going to use these now to upgrade the energizing rod. We're going to try and go from the current blazing up to Niotic. For that, we're going to need 8 of these Niotic crystals, which again, shouldn't take too long. That really didn't take too long. There's 8 Niotic crystals. Let's dump in the blazing rod. Can I upgrade this? Start, start, and start. Again, having all of these different crafting CPUs here really coming in clutch there, allowing us to do all those crafts simultaneously. And boom, we now have this energizing rod, which can do 10,000 redstone flux per tick. And so now we can go ahead and hopefully make this just a tiny bit faster. We could also, if we wanted to, we could either move the flux point or request a second flux point. Putting this directly on here does give it like maximum power. I don't think annoyingly that this connects directly, which is really unfortunate. I don't think you can connect this directly to this. Even if you put it on the bottom, I think you do still have to have some kind of energy cable. I could be mistaken, but I think this, oh no, maybe it totally does work. Okay, in that case, if I do this, that should now be getting the maximum power it can get, 8,600 there. And we could even, if we wanted to do a little bit of time in a bottle accelerating, which is going to drain the power in there very quickly, but it's also going to make these crystals as fast as we possibly can. Of course, we are kind of power limited now, and that's really the big issue. And if we really wanted to, I think we could also do this as well and kind of massively increase the power production on that magmeter so that down here we can do this a lot faster as well. All right, and not too long later, especially with the time in a bottle, and we have our 13th spirited crystal. Nice. So now we'll drop that in the system. We will once again go ahead and pick up our Niotic magmeter. And Chad does make a good point here that I didn't really think about, but we should probably just place this down in the nether, because really the only thing that can go wrong for us now is not having enough lava throughput. Real quick, let's start. But if we just put this in the nether, because we do have flux points now available to us, we can of course move the power from the nether to the overworld wirelessly. And so really all we should have to do is just place this down next to our fluid cell in the nether, which is already chunk loaded, and then just place the flux plug onto that. And at that point, it's not really going to interfere with our current lava transportation. If we just set the top here to output, auto eject is on, that's going to get power. We can then put this down really anywhere we like so. That is going to send the full 8,000 redstone flux per tick over through to the overworld for us to use going forward, which means we should now be able to go ahead and reconnect up our controller. Again, not necessary. It is still a waste of power, but it looks a bit nicer and it is going to come in useful, I think, in the future. Boom and boom. And so now we should be producing a good deal more power than we were at the start of the episode, and hopefully enough that we're not going to see quite so many power issues going forward. The only slight trouble, I guess, with the new setup we have is that now we're actually not sending the new magmeter power to everything in the base. We're only sending it over to those machines that have flux plugs connected. One thing we could do here, though, is we could go ahead and move this flux point and just place it down onto the energy cell. Again, using the energy cell as a buffer here, probably not our best choice. And in fact, we can probably kind of get rid of this generator now. I don't think that's strictly necessary. I think this one will work on its own at powering that, and I think we could probably just put a flux point here, and that's going to go ahead and fill this up with power from the magmeter, and it's also going to put power into here. And we could also potentially look at changing this out for a different kind of battery. If we do that, that is going to require, I think, a bit of a rethink in terms of power, because a lot of our power is being transported by the integrated dynamic system. But honestly, if we go to Flux Networks, Flux Networks does add these flux storage, basic, Herculean, and Gargantuan. And I don't think these are too difficult to make. Let's have a look here, because I'm also a little worried about the throughput of the energy battery. It seems a little small. If we want to make this, we totally can, and that's capable of storing 2 million RF, which is more than our current battery, but not massively more. Over here, how is this doing? Because see, the output is only 1,000 RF per tick, which is why I think this is maybe somewhat limited, although that could just be because we're not using that much power. But if we do this instead, does that connect? It does, and in fact, it looks like that connects kind of wirelessly to our power production. It looks like power just kind of comes through here, which is fine, but then I wonder if we can put an energy interface onto here to give our integrated dynamic system access to what's in there as well. That looks like it works, and so I'm hopeful that things should get power. I say that, but I can't help but notice that I don't have the ability to fly anymore, and so part of me is thinking that isn't working. Let me try energy importer maybe. That might solve the issue if we go ahead and kind of replace this with an energy importer and then put a variable card in the top. Does that allow us to import that energy? It looks like the answer there is still no, unfortunately. And so I guess we are just gonna have to go ahead and put this kind of back down like this. At that point, that does give us our flight back because that's now reconnected. At some point, we're probably going to go through and just like move over from integrated dynamics to flux networks. You know, just put a flux point on the environmental controller and put flux points down around different parts of the base. For now, though, we're going to have to leave that kind of legacy feature in place because it does allow stuff to work. One final thing we could do is we could look at making the controller from flux networks. This, not too difficult to make either. If you have enough obsidian, which we do not, that's fine. We can go ahead and buy a stack from the system here. The flux controller really has the benefit of allowing us to charge wirelessly, which is going to be particularly useful for our wireless crafting terminal, which currently is doing okay, but eventually is going to run out of power. I thought we had all this stuff to make this, but it looks like we do not. Let me try that again. I'm assuming we don't have enough flux dust, which thankfully isn't too difficult. We can just grab some more redstone and some more obsidian. We can quickly head on through to the nether, and we should be able to whip up some more of that fairly easily. I'll do another 2 stacks, and I think that should do us for a little while here. Actually, never mind, chat is right here. I completely forget every time that once you have one flux block, you can actually use this in place of bedrock. So if I do this and drop these on here, we can then do this, and that makes the flux dust at home. Nice. And I will go ahead and break those because they look horrible there, but we should now have everything that we need in order to make this controller happen. And as I mentioned, we should be able to put this down really anywhere that we like. And in here, we're going to set it to Isaac Power. We're then going to go to the wireless charging tab. We're going to click all of the slots, apart from the inventory because you can't. We're going to enable wireless charging, hit apply, and now we should start to see the energy in our wireless crafting terminal going up, despite us not being at a charger, because all of our stuff is just going to be charged wirelessly. Unfortunately, not the netherite jetpack because it doesn't actually have energy like that, but we could actually look at upgrading this to the netherite jetpack that we saw before. Obviously not particularly useful here in the overworld because we do have creative flight, but we can, if we want, craft this into a leather strap, which kind of means there's no going back now. And from there, we just need a bunch of netherite in multiple forms, which should be fairly straightforward. We have got a bunch of netherite scrap here, and of course, we've got gold coming in automatically. That gets us 22 netherite. For the capacitor here, we need 3 energy cells, so we need 5 in total. Let me get 5 of these basic energy cells. Let's upgrade all of those to the netherite energy cells. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That should be enough for us to craft up the netherite capacitor, and I'm hopeful that it's also enough to craft 2 thrusters. It looks like we don't quite have enough, but that's just because we need more of these basic coils. I think we're not quite gonna have enough netherite here. 1, yeah, we're missing like 2 netherite. That, of course, is perfectly fine though. We do have the ability still to buy more netherite scrap. Let me throw that in over here. You'll see now that this mechanical squeezer is still losing power, which again is not ideal, but hopefully we should be able to accelerate this and it should hold power a bit more than it did before. Yeah, it doesn't go down anywhere near as fast, which is fantastic. Let's do this and this, craft up even more netherite ingots. 2 should be more than enough. And with that, I think that's everything to make our second thruster, and that should be everything to make the netherite jetpack. Never mind, we're missing 2 more netherite ingots, of course we are. Also probably worth teaching the system how to make the netherite ingots as well, just so again we don't have to do this manually in the future. Let me quickly encode that recipe. Let's go and do this. Encode, and boom. Cool. And then from there, now we should have everything for the netherite jetpack, which should immediately start to fill up with power as soon as we put it into our inventory. And it's also going to do it in our armor slot as well. I don't know the hotkey by default for turning the engine on. Let me go to options, controls, keybinds, and jetpack. V is the default, but V is a conflict. What are we using here? Head, switch mode, toggle engine, cycle up. We don't need a lot of these, I don't think. Hover mode here is for the create jetpack, so we don't need that anymore either. And then use secondary, also not needed. And toggle speed selection, also not needed, at least not right now. So we can use V here to turn our engine on. And then we can use hitch, I think, to turn the hover on. And you'll see that there's another benefit to this, and that's it makes us real fast. That is due to the throttle on the left there. You can use the comma and period keys to lower and increase the throttle as well. I might turn it down ever so slightly, because although I do love the speed, and we are paying for speed, this is maybe a bit excessive on the speed front. Does it change if I take the speed module out? Because we might be able to save some power now by taking the speed module out of here. Because it's maybe not strictly necessary. It's also quite possible the flight module is not that necessary either, because the hover speed on here is 0, so you actually don't fall. It's not quite as good as the creative flight. I do still think the creative flight is pretty good at allowing you to move like vertically and through space quite easily, whereas the jetpack is pretty good, but just not quite as good at the horizontal movement. You move very slowly up and down like this, but you can move around very quickly. But I do think it means that we probably don't necessarily need the speed module, although when we're not flying, we do lose that speed. And so I think for now, especially given the extra power that we have available to us, I'm just going to go ahead and put the speed module back in. That way, whether we're flying or whether we're just walking, we do have that extra speed available to us. And another big benefit of the wireless charger is that it does also work interdimensionally as well. And so if we were to go through to the nether, we would still be wirelessly charging our jetpack. And so we don't have to worry about charging our jetpack before we leave. It's just always going to be charged all of the time, which is good. You'll see on the left there, we're at 19.5. It's going to go up to 19.6 and 0.7. It's going to keep going up all the time, which is fantastic. And so I think that is going to about do it for this episode of Forever Factory. Next time we'll come back. We did a lot of like quality of life stuff today. We kind of worked on our AE2 system, and we worked on improving our autocrafting setup and of course getting a bit more power. But I think next time we'll come back, and I do want to kind of refocus back on the main quest line. I do want to look at kind of improving our setup over here. We still have stuff that we need to automate, because we still can't just request an infinite number of finished PCBs, because we don't have things like the titanium plates, the electron wire, the circuit back plates, or the electronic components automated. I want to get those automated. I want to get that kind of finished, and so we can move forward to actually getting our single board computers up and running. And at that point, we can look at maybe selling those, because we are getting pretty low on funds. We're down to just 3 million. Thankfully, the money doesn't seem to be going down very quickly at all. I think most things are backed up now, so things are kind of running fairly smoothly, but we do still need to kind of refocus on making some more money going forward. But that is a problem for future Isaac. For now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Forever Factory there.